I bought my cabin in the mountains of western Montana specifically to get away from people who complained about everything. Yet somehow the Pinewood Valley Homeowners Association found me anyway. The property sat on 3 acres of pine forest outside of Whitefish, with a real stone fireplace and chimney that I used almost daily during the brutal winter months. I worked remotely as a software engineer, which meant I could live anywhere with decent internet, and I chose isolation. The cabin was perfect, built in the 70s with thick log walls and double-pane windows that kept the cold at bay. I moved in during late August, and by October, I was burning wood every evening as temperatures dropped. That's when Brenda Anderson knocked on my door for the first time. I opened it to find a woman in her late 40s with blonde highlights, a puffy vest over a crisp white blouse, and an expression that suggested she smelled something rotten. She held a clipboard against her chest like a shield. "You must be Derek Irving," she said, not waiting for confirmation. "I'm Brenda Anderson, president of the Pinewood Valley HOA. We need to discuss your chimney." "My chimney?" I glanced up at the stone structure rising from my roof. Smoke curled peacefully into the crisp autumn air. "What about it?" "The smoke," she said, as if explaining something to a child. "It's creating a nuisance for the neighborhood. I can smell it from my house and it's quite unpleasant." I stared at her. "You live a quarter-mile away. I've seen your place." "Half a mile, actually, but that's beside the point." She clutched her clipboard tighter. "According to the HOA bylaws, Section 12, subsection 4, residents cannot create excessive smoke, odors, or other nuisances that affect the quality of life for neighboring homeowners." "I'm burning firewood in a fireplace," I said slowly. "In Montana, in October. This is what people do." "The bylaws don't have exceptions for what people normally do, Mr. Irving. They exist to maintain property values and ensure everyone can enjoy their homes without interference." She pulled a paper from her clipboard and thrust it at me. "This is your first official warning. If the smoke continues, you'll face fines of $200 per day." I took the paper, scanning the dense text. Sure enough, buried in paragraph after paragraph of legal language, there was mention of smoke and nuisances. But it clearly referred to things like burning trash or creating industrial pollution, not using a residential fireplace. "This is ridiculous," I said. "Everyone out here has fireplaces. Wood heat is normal. Most people use their fireplaces occasionally for ambience. You've been using yours daily. That's excessive." She gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure you understand we have standards to uphold. And I'm sure you understand I'm not paying fines for heating my house." Her smile vanished. "Then we'll see you at the next HOA meeting. November 5th, 7 p.m. at the community center. You can present your case to the board." She turned and walked back to her white Lexus SUV, her heels clicking on my gravel driveway. I closed the door and looked at the warning letter again. The whole thing felt surreal. I'd bought this place specifically to avoid this kind of nonsense, yet here it was, following me into the wilderness. I'd reviewed the HOA documents before purchasing, but they'd seemed reasonable then, mostly focused on preventing junk cars in yards and keeping properties maintained. This smoke complaint felt like overreach. Over the next few days, I did my research. Montana law gave HOAs certain powers, but those powers weren't unlimited. An HOA couldn't prevent someone from using a legitimate heating source, especially when that source was part of the home's original design. I also called my neighbor, Tom Westfield, an older guy who lived on the other side of me. "Brenda complained about your fireplace," he laughed when I told him. "That woman complains about everything. Last year she tried to fine me because my truck was the wrong color. Said brown vehicles were aesthetically displeasing. What happened? I ignored her. Eventually, she moved on to bothering someone else. That's what Brenda does. She finds something to fixate on, throws her weight around, then gets bored and finds a new target. She mentioned fines. She mentions a lot of things. The HOA board is just her and two other people who do whatever she says. Old Jerry Matthews and his wife Susan. They're in their 70s and just vote yes to everything Brenda wants because it's easier than arguing with her. That didn't make me feel better. So she actually could fine me. Technically, yes, if the board approves it. But here's the thing, Derek. Most of what Brenda does is bluffing. She counts on people being too tired or too intimidated to fight back. If you actually push back, especially with a lawyer, she usually backs down. Costs too much to defend in real court. I thanked Tom and hung up, then spent the evening researching Montana property law and HOA regulations. The more I read, the more confident I became that Brenda didn't have a legal leg to stand on. A fireplace used for legitimate heating purposes couldn't be considered a nuisance, especially in a rural mountain community where wood heat was standard. November 5th arrived cold and clear. I'd been using my fireplace every day, partly out of necessity and partly out of principle. The temperature had dropped into the 20s at night, and my fireplace was more efficient than running electric baseboards. I drove to the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance, and found about 15 people already there. The community center was basically a large room with folding chairs, a kitchenette in the corner, and photographs of local wildlife on the walls. Brenda sat at a folding table at the front, flanked by an elderly couple I assumed were Jerry and Susan Matthews. Everyone else sat in the audience, most of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Brenda called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her knuckles on the table. Thank you all for coming. We have several items on the agenda tonight, but first we need to address the smoke nuisance from 4247 Pine Ridge Road. That was my address. Everyone turned to look at me. Mr. Irving has been burning wood daily in his fireplace, creating excessive smoke that affects the air quality of the entire neighborhood, Brenda continued. Despite receiving a written warning, he has continued this behavior. I raised my hand. Can I respond to that? You'll have your turn to speak. She shuffled papers on her table. I've documented the smoke emissions over the past 3 weeks, October 10th through November 4th. 25 days of continuous smoke pollution. It's a fireplace, I said, not bothering to wait for permission. It's how I heat my house. The bylaws clearly state that residents cannot create nuisances. Excessive smoke qualifies as a nuisance. The bylaws refer to burning trash or creating industrial pollution, not using a residential fireplace for its intended purpose. Brenda's face tightened. That's your interpretation. That's the correct interpretation. I've consulted with a property attorney. I hadn't actually hired one yet, but I'd read enough to know my rights. Montana law protects the use of legitimate heating sources. You can't fine someone for heating their home. We absolutely can enforce our bylaws, Brenda shot back. Every homeowner agreed to those bylaws when they purchased their property. Bylaws can't override state law, I said, and they can't prohibit normal use of a home's existing features. The elderly man, Jerry, leaned toward Brenda and whispered something. She whispered back, her expression getting more pinched. Finally, she looked at me again. The board will take this matter under advisement. We'll issue our decision within 2 weeks. There's nothing to decide, I said. I'm using my fireplace. I'm going to keep using it. If you try to fine me, I'll contest it. A few people in the audience murmured. I caught some approving nods. Apparently, I wasn't the only person who found Brenda's management style excessive. The rest of the meeting dragged on with discussions about holiday decorations, rules about exterior paint colors, and a debate about whether basketball hoops were allowed in driveways. I left after an hour, confident I'd made my point, but unsure if Brenda would actually back down. She didn't. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter informing me I'd been fined $200 per day for 25 days of smoke violations, totaling $5,000, with continuing fines of $200 per day until I ceased using my fireplace. The letter included instructions for payment and a warning that failure to pay would result in a lien against my property. I called a real estate attorney in Kalispell that afternoon. Her name was Patricia Morrison, and she specialized in property disputes. I explained the situation while she listened without interrupting. "They can't do this," she said when I finished. "They can't fine you for using a fireplace. That's a legitimate heating source, and Montana has specific statutes protecting homeowners from this type of HOA overreach." "So what do I do?" "Write them a letter. I'll draft it for you. Basically, it'll say you dispute the fines, you're not paying them, and if they proceed with a lien, you'll sue for harassment and improper enforcement of bylaws. That usually makes HOAs think twice. And if it doesn't, then we take them to court and we win. But it probably won't come to that. Most HOA boards fold when they realize they'll have to pay legal fees to defend an unwinnable case." Patricia drafted the letter, and I sent it certified mail to Brenda's address. Then I continued using my fireplace every day as November turned colder and snow began to fall. Brenda showed up at my door again on a Tuesday morning, this time with Jerry Matthews in tow. The old man looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot and not making eye contact. "Mr. Irving," Brenda began, her voice icy, "your refusal to comply with HOA regulations is unacceptable." "Your attempt to fine me for heating my house is unacceptable," I countered. "I've consulted with an attorney. What you're doing is illegal." "The bylaws don't override state law," I interrupted. "We've been over this. I'm not paying your fines, and if you file a lien, I'll sue." Jerry finally spoke up, his voice quiet. "Brenda, maybe we should reconsider this. If he's got a lawyer and if the fireplace is his heat source." "It's not his only heat source," Brenda snapped. "He has electric heat." "Electric baseboard heaters that cost a fortune to run," I said. "My fireplace is efficient and economical. This is Montana. People heat with wood." "Not in Pinewood Valley," Brenda said. "We have standards." "You have overreach," I replied. "And I'm done discussing this. Leave my property or I'll call the sheriff for trespassing." Brenda's face flushed red. She opened her mouth, closed it, then spun around and marched back to her SUV. Jerry gave me an apologetic look before following her. I thought that might be the end of it, but I underestimated Brenda's stubbornness. Over the next 2 weeks, I received multiple letters, each more threatening than the last. The fines supposedly increased to $300 per day, then $400. The total amount claimed reached over $15,000. Each letter threatened liens, legal action, and foreclosure. I forwarded everything to Patricia, who sent increasingly firm responses explaining that the HOA had no legal standing and would face consequences for harassment if they continued. December arrived with heavy snow and bitter cold. Temperatures dropped below zero at night and my fireplace ran constantly. I burned through cord after cord of seasoned pine and fir, keeping my cabin warm and comfortable while the world outside turned white and frozen. That's when the big storm hit. The weather forecast had been predicting it for days. A massive winter storm rolling down from Canada, bringing heavy snow, high winds, and dangerous cold. On December 15th, it arrived with a vengeance. I woke to howling wind and snow falling so thick I couldn't see the trees 30 feet from my window. I'd prepared, of course. I had plenty of firewood stacked under a covered area beside the house, canned food, batteries, flashlights, and a full tank of propane for my backup generator. I'd lived in Montana long enough to know you didn't mess around with winter storms. The power went out around 10 a.m. The lights flickered twice, then died. I checked my breaker box out of habit, but I knew it wasn't a problem on my end. The whole grid was probably down. I fired up my generator to keep my refrigerator running and charge my electronics, but I relied on my fireplace for heat. The cabin stayed comfortable while wind screamed outside and snow piled higher. Around 2 p.m. my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered it anyway. Derek Irving. A woman's voice, not Brenda's, speaking. "This is Susan Matthews. I'm on the HOA board. I'm calling because Brenda's in trouble and she needs help." I waited, saying nothing. "Her power's out," Susan continued. "She doesn't have a fireplace, just electric heat, and her house is getting cold. Really cold. She called me and Jerry, but we're staying with our daughter in Kalispell until the storm passes. We're not in the neighborhood." "Okay," I said. "Why are you calling me?" "Because you're close to her and you have heat. She needs somewhere warm to stay until the power comes back on." I almost laughed. "You want me to help the woman who's been trying to fine me thousands of dollars for heating my house? I know, it's awkward. But Derek, it's dangerous. The temperature in her house is already down to 45 degrees and it's dropping. With this cold, she could be in serious danger if she stays there. She can go to a hotel. Everything's booked because of the storm. Everyone who evacuated took the rooms. And the roads are terrible, nearly impassable. She shouldn't be driving in this." I looked out my window at the blizzard. Susan was right about the roads. I wouldn't want to drive in this either. "Please," Susan said. "I know she's been difficult, but she's a human being and she needs help." I closed my eyes, fighting between irritation and basic human decency. "Fine. Tell her she can come over, but we're going to have a conversation about those fines. Thank you so much. I'll call her right now." I hung up and added more wood to the fire. 20 minutes later, I heard a vehicle struggling up my driveway. I opened the door to see Brenda's Lexus sliding through 8 inches of fresh snow, its tires spinning. She made it to my turnaround and parked, then climbed out wearing a wool coat and carrying a small duffel bag. She looked miserable. Her nose was red, her eyes watery, and she was shivering despite the heavy coat. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't look imperious or commanding. She looked scared. "Thank you for letting me come," she said as she reached the door. Her voice was quiet, almost meek. I stepped aside to let her in. The warmth from the fireplace hit her immediately, and she made a small sound of relief. "You can put your bag down over there," I said, pointing to a spot near the couch. "I'll make coffee." She set her bag down and moved toward the fireplace, holding her hands out to the warmth. I went to the kitchen, scooped grounds into my French press, and boiled water on my propane stove. The whole time, neither of us spoke. When the coffee was ready, I poured 2 mugs and brought one to Brenda. She took it with both hands, wrapping her fingers around the warm ceramic. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I know I've been terrible to you." "Yes, you have," I agreed. I sat in my recliner, letting her have the couch closer to the fire. "You tried to fine me for doing exactly what's keeping us both warm right now." "I know." She stared into her coffee. "I was wrong." "Why did you do it?" She was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Wind rattled the windows. Finally, she spoke. "Because I needed to feel in control of something," she said. "My life's been falling apart, and being HOA president made me feel like I had power over at least one thing. So I used that power, even when I shouldn't have." "What's been falling apart?" My marriage ended last year. 23 years, and he left me for someone younger. Then I got laid off from my job in real estate because the market crashed. I poured everything I had into my house, and I convinced myself that if I could just keep the neighborhood perfect, keep everyone following the rules, then maybe I'd feel less like a failure. She wiped her eyes. So I made up problems. I harassed people over nothing. I became exactly the kind of person I used to hate. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me still felt angry about the fines and the threats and the certified letters. But sitting across from this shivering, crying woman who'd lost her heat, it was hard to hold onto that anger. "The fines need to go away," I said. "All of them, and you need to stop harassing people." "I will. I'll withdraw all the fines against you. I'll write it up officially and have Jerry and Susan sign it, and I'll step down as HOA president." "You don't have to step down. You just have to be reasonable." She looked at me, surprised. "After everything I did, everyone makes mistakes. The question is whether you learn from them." She nodded slowly, then sipped her coffee. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm. "How long can I stay?" she asked eventually. "Until the power comes back on or the storm clears, whichever comes first." "Thank you." The storm continued through the afternoon and into the evening. I made sandwiches for dinner using bread I'd baked earlier in the week and deli meat from the refrigerator. We ate in the living room, still not talking much, but the silence had become less awkward. Around 8 p.m., Brenda's phone rang. She answered, listened, then hung up with a sigh. That was the power company. They're saying it could be 3 days before power's restored. Maybe longer. "You can stay here," I said. "I have a guest bedroom upstairs. It's not fancy, but it's warm." "I can't impose like that. You're already here, and I'm not sending you out into that." I gestured at the window where snow continued to fall heavily. "Why are you being so nice to me?" I thought about that. Because being angry takes energy, and I'd rather spend that energy on other things. And because you apologized, which takes guts. She started crying again, quietly this time. I pretended not to notice and added another log to the fire. Over the next 3 days, Brenda and I developed an unexpected routine. I'd wake early and build up the fire, then make coffee and breakfast. She'd help with dishes. Then we'd spend the day reading, talking, or just watching the snow fall. I worked a few hours each day on my laptop, my generator keeping my internet router powered. Brenda mostly stayed near the fireplace, occasionally checking her phone for updates. We talked about a lot of things. She told me about her marriage, how it had slowly deteriorated over years before finally collapsing. I told her about my decision to leave Denver and move to Montana, seeking peace and quiet. She asked about my work, and I explained software development in terms simple enough for anyone to understand. I asked about her real estate career, and she described the boom and bust cycles she'd seen over 2 decades. On the second evening, she brought up the HOA again. "I really am going to withdraw those fines," she said, "and I want to change how we do things, make the HOA actually helpful instead of just restrictive." "What did you have in mind?" "Well, what if we organized group bulk buys for things like heating oil or firewood? We could negotiate better prices if we all ordered together. And maybe we could put together a neighborhood emergency plan for situations like this, so everyone knows who has generators or fireplaces and can help each other." I nodded. "That sounds useful. Actually helpful instead of just telling people what they can't do." "Exactly." She seemed excited now, more animated than I'd seen her. "We could have a community tool library so people don't all have to own their own snow blowers and chainsaws. And maybe organize group trail maintenance in the summer. You should propose that stuff at the next meeting." "I will, If people even want me to stay on the board after how I've acted, give them a reason to want you there. Show them you've changed. On the third day, December 18th, the storm finally cleared. The sky turned brilliant blue, and the sun reflected off fresh snow with blinding intensity. The whole world looked clean and new. The power company estimated service would be restored by evening. Brenda packed her duffel bag while I made one last pot of coffee. "Thank you," she said as she zipped the bag closed, "for everything. For letting me stay, for not throwing my mistakes in my face, for giving me a chance to be better." "Just follow through on what you said," I replied. "That'll be thanks enough." She left around noon, her Lexus navigating the plowed driveway carefully. I waved from the doorway, then closed the door and went back to my normal life. The power came back on that evening, just as predicted. Over the next week, I received 3 certified letters from the HOA. The first was an official withdrawal of all fines against me, signed by Brenda, Jerry, and Susan. The second was an apology for improper enforcement of bylaws and acknowledgement that my use of my fireplace was appropriate and allowed. The third was an invitation to an emergency HOA meeting on December 28th to discuss new community initiatives. I attended the meeting, mostly out of curiosity. The same community center, the same folding chairs, but the atmosphere was completely different. About 30 people showed up, nearly double the attendance from the November meeting. Brenda stood at the front table, looking nervous. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "I want to start by apologizing for my behavior this past year. I've been using my position to push people around instead of helping them, and that was wrong. I'm sorry." People shifted in their seats. A few nodded. "I want to propose some changes," Brenda continued. "Real changes that make this HOA useful instead of just restrictive." She outlined the ideas she'd mentioned to me: bulk buying programs, emergency planning, a tool library, community work parties. She also proposed revising the bylaws to remove vague language that could be abused and adding clear appeal processes for any future violations. "I'm also proposing we add 2 more board members," she said. "A board of 3 is too small and gives any one person too much power. We should have 5 members with staggered terms." Tom Westfield, my neighbor, raised his hand. "Why should we trust you're actually going to change?" "You shouldn't," Brenda said simply. "Not yet. I have to earn that trust back by following through. If I screw up again, vote me out. Add recall procedures to the bylaws so you don't have to wait for my term to end. Hold me accountable." That seemed to satisfy people. The meeting continued for 2 hours, with real discussion and debate about how to improve the neighborhood. People volunteered for committees. Someone suggested a neighborhood emergency phone tree. Another person offered to coordinate the tool library from their garage. By the end of the meeting, I actually felt good about the HOA for the first time since moving in. As people filed out, Brenda caught my eye and mouthed, "Thank you." I nodded back. January arrived with more snow and bitter cold, but my fireplace kept me warm without complaint or interference. The bulk firewood order went through, saving everyone about 30% compared to individual purchases. The emergency phone tree got tested during another power outage in mid-January, and everyone checked in on each other to make sure no one was in danger. Brenda stayed true to her word. She was still involved in the HOA, but she transformed from a tyrant into someone who actually cared about helping the community function better. She organized the first neighborhood potluck in years, held in the community center on February 14th. Nearly 50 people attended, sharing food and stories and actually getting to know each other. I brought chili and cornbread. Brenda brought a casserole and chocolate cake. We ended up sitting at the same table with Tom and his wife, Jerry and Susan Matthews, and a few other neighbors whose names I'd learned over the past months. "This is nice," Susan Matthews said, looking around at all the people talking and laughing. I'd forgotten how nice a real community could be. "We just needed someone to bring us together," Tom's wife said, "instead of pushing us apart." Brenda smiled, but I could see it was bittersweet. She'd learned a hard lesson about power and control, but she'd learned it. That counted for something. March brought the first hints of spring, with longer days and temperatures creeping above freezing. I still used my fireplace most evenings because mountain nights stayed cold, but I didn't need it running constantly anymore. I'd burned through almost 6 cords of wood over the winter, every piece of it without complaint or fine. One Saturday morning, Brenda knocked on my door again, but this time she was smiling and holding a plate covered with aluminum foil. "I made cookies," she said. "Thought you might like some." "Thanks," I took the plate. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion, just being neighborly." She paused. "Also, I wanted to tell you I got a job offer, marketing position at a resort in Big Mountain. It's not real estate, but it's good work." "That's great, congratulations." "I start next month." "Which means I'll probably need to reduce my HOA involvement. I'm going to propose we elect a new president at the April meeting." "You sure?" "Yeah. I think I've done what I needed to do here. Fixed what I broke. Now it's time to let someone else lead. Maybe Tom, he seems interested." "He'd be good at it." "I think so too." She looked at my chimney, smoke curling lazily from the top. "I was such an idiot about that whole thing." "You admitted it and changed. That's more than most people do. Still, I could have really hurt you, all because I was hurting and taking it out on everyone around me. But you didn't. And now we have a functional HOA and a real community, so maybe something good came from it." She smiled. "Maybe so." After she left, I ate one of the cookies. Chocolate chip, still warm. They were good. The April HOA meeting confirmed Tom as the new president, with Brenda staying on as a regular board member with no special authority. 2 other community members joined the expanded board, and they immediately started working on updating the bylaws with clearer language and better protections for homeowners. I volunteered to help digitize all the HOA documents and create a website where everyone could access bylaws, meeting minutes, and community resources. It seemed like a good use of my skills, and it meant fewer confusing paper documents that could be misinterpreted. Summer came, and with it, the community work parties Brenda had proposed. We spent weekends clearing trails, painting the community center, and building a proper shed for the tool library. It was good work, satisfying in a way my remote software job sometimes wasn't. Physical labor with visible results, done alongside neighbors who were becoming actual friends. Brenda seemed happier than when I'd first met her. Her new job apparently suited her, and she'd started dating someone she'd met through work. She still came to HOA meetings and community events, but she wasn't trying to control everything anymore. She'd learned to let go. One evening in July, several of us gathered at Tom's place for a barbecue. The weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine. We sat on Tom's deck, eating grilled burgers and watching the sun set behind the mountains. "You know," Tom said, gesturing with a beer bottle, "a year ago, half the people here couldn't stand each other because of HOA nonsense. Now look at us." "Character development," I joked. "More like learning what actually matters," Brenda said. She was sitting with her new boyfriend, Marcus, a quiet guy who worked in hospitality. "Fighting over stupid stuff or taking care of each other?" "Both," Susan Matthews said. "Sometimes you have to fight over the stupid stuff before you learn what actually matters." Everyone laughed, and the conversation drifted to other topics. plans for a neighborhood 4th of July party, whose turn it was to coordinate the tool library, whether we should all chip in for a community snow plow next winter. I sat back and listened, feeling content. I'd moved to Montana for peace and quiet, to escape the chaos of city life and demanding people. I'd found that, but I'd also found something I hadn't expected: a real community. People who looked out for each other, who'd learned from their mistakes, who'd chosen cooperation over conflict. And it had all started because Karen complained about my chimney smoke, then begged for heat when her power died. Sometimes the worst situations led to the best outcomes, if people were willing to learn and change. As fall approached again, and I started stacking firewood for the coming winter, I reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. The HOA had transformed from an oppressive force into something genuinely helpful. Brenda had gone from being the neighborhood tyrant to a valued community member, and I'd gone from being an isolated hermit to someone with actual friends and connections. September brought the first cold nights, and I started using my fireplace again. This time, no one complained. Instead, Tom texted me asking what type of wood I preferred and whether I wanted to split a cord with him to save on delivery fees. I accepted his offer, and we spent a Saturday afternoon stacking wood together, working in comfortable silence broken by occasional conversation. When we finished, he invited me to stay for dinner, and I met his extended family who were visiting from Billings. This was what community was supposed to feel like. Not rules and restrictions and neighbors spying on each other, but people helping each other and sharing resources and actually giving a damn about one another's well-being. October arrived with stunning fall colors, the aspens turning gold against the evergreen pines. The anniversary of my first confrontation with Brenda passed without incident, marked only by me noticing the date and reflecting on how different things were now. The HOA held its October meeting, and attendance remained high. People actually wanted to be involved now because the HOA actually did useful things. We discussed plans for a neighborhood Halloween party, approved a bulk order for heating oil for those who didn't use wood, and reviewed the updated bylaws that the board had been refining all summer. The new bylaws were clearer and fairer, with specific definitions of what constituted violations and a proper appeals process for anyone who disagreed with board decisions. The section about smoke and nuisances had been completely rewritten to specify that normal use of fireplaces, grills, and other standard residential features couldn't be considered violations. Much better, I commented after reading through the revised version. We learned from our mistakes, Tom said. That's all we can do. After the meeting, Brenda pulled me aside. I wanted you to know I'm moving, she said. Marcus and I found a place in Whitefish closer to both our jobs. I'll be leaving the HOA board. Will you stay involved in the community? When I can, but it's a 40-minute drive, so probably not as much as I'd like. She paused. I wanted to thank you again for that week during the storm, for being kind when I didn't deserve it. You helped me become a better person. You did the work yourself, I said. I just provided the warm place to think about it, she laughed. Still, I won't forget it. She moved at the end of October, and the neighborhood threw her a going-away party at the community center. It was well attended, and everyone wished her well. Whatever anger people had felt toward her had long since dissipated, replaced by appreciation for how she'd helped turn the HOA around. November came, and with it, more snow and cold. My fireplace ran daily, keeping my cabin warm through long winter nights. I burned wood without guilt or worry, knowing that I was doing exactly what generations of Montana residents had done before me, using the resources at hand to stay comfortable in a harsh climate. I also knew that if my power ever went out, I had neighbors who would check on me. And if any of them needed help, I'd do the same. That's what community meant, what it had always meant, beneath all the rules and regulations and petty disputes. December brought another major storm, not quite as severe as the previous years, but still significant. This time, the neighborhood's emergency plan worked perfectly. Everyone checked in on the phone tree. Those with generators and fireplaces opened their homes to those without, and the community center was set up as a warming station with propane heaters. No one suffered. No one was left in the cold. We took care of each other, the way communities are supposed to. When Christmas arrived, I found myself invited to 3 different neighborhood gatherings. I attended all of them, bringing food and gifts and enjoying the company of people I now genuinely considered friends. Tom and his family, Jerry and Susan, Marcus and Brenda, who drove out from Whitefish, others whose names I now knew, whose lives I'd become a small part of. On Christmas evening, I sat in my cabin watching snow fall gently outside my windows. My fireplace crackled with burning pine, filling the room with warmth and the pleasant scent of wood smoke. I thought about the journey of the past year and a half, from confrontation to crisis, to understanding to community. It hadn't been the isolated, peaceful existence I'd imagined when I bought this place. It had been better. Messier, more complicated, filled with human drama and conflict and reconciliation. But better, because isolation isn't peace, not really. It's just absence. Real peace comes from connection, from being part of something larger than yourself, from knowing you matter to other people and they matter to you. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Power still on at your place," I replied. "Yeah, all good. You?" "Same, just checking. Stay warm." "You too." I set my phone down and added another log to the fire, watching sparks spiral up the chimney. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white silence. Inside, I was warm and safe and connected to a community that had grown from conflict into something real and lasting. And if anyone ever complained about my chimney smoke again, I knew they'd have to answer to the entire neighborhood. But I doubted anyone would. We'd learned what mattered, not rules for rules' sake, but people taking care of people. That was enough. That was everything. Spring came early the following year, with March bringing warm winds that melted snow and exposed the brown grass beneath. The neighborhood emerged from winter like bears from hibernation, everyone eager for sunshine and outdoor activities. The HOA organized a community cleanup day, and nearly everyone showed up to rake, haul away debris, and prepare common areas for summer. We worked side by side, talking and laughing, planning camping trips and trail rides for the coming months. I worked alongside Jerry Matthews, who at 78 still insisted on doing his share of the raking. "You know," he said as we bagged pine needles, "I'm glad you stood up to Brenda last year. Someone needed to." "You could have," I pointed out. "I could have. Should have, really. But I took the easy road, just went along with whatever she wanted. I'm not proud of that. You made up for it by helping fix things." "Maybe. Still, I learned something from watching you two work it out. Sometimes standing your ground is the kindest thing you can do, because it forces people to confront their own behavior." I thought about that as we continued working. He was right. If I just caved to Brenda's demands, paid the fines, stopped using my fireplace, she never would have hit rock bottom. She never would have ended up freezing in her powerless house, forced to ask for help from someone she'd been persecuting. And she never would have had the chance to realize what she'd become and choose to change. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst behavior. By May, The mountains were green and alive, wildflowers blooming in meadows and elk returning to higher elevations. The neighborhood settled into a comfortable rhythm, the HOA handling necessary business without drama, neighbors helping each other without needing to be asked. I continued working remotely, but I made time for community activities. Hiking with Tom on weekends, helping Susan with her garden, playing poker with a group of guys who met every other Thursday at rotating houses. In June, Tom called an HOA meeting to discuss a new issue. A development company wanted to buy the empty lot at the neighborhood entrance and build a gas station and convenience store. It would be convenient, Tom acknowledged as he presented the information. Closest gas right now is 20 minutes away, but it would also change the character of the neighborhood. We need to decide if that's a change we want. The discussion was passionate but respectful. Some people liked the idea of nearby gas and supplies. Others worried about increased traffic and noise. We voted to invite the developers to present their plans at the next meeting, so everyone could make an informed decision. The developers came in July, presenting plans for a small, tastefully designed facility that would blend with the mountain aesthetic. They agreed to restrictions on hours of operation, noise levels, and exterior lighting. The community voted to approve the project with those conditions. This was how an HOA was supposed to work, facilitating community decisions, not dictating them. Protecting property values through reasonable standards, not arbitrary rules. Bringing people together instead of driving them apart. August brought Brenda back for a visit. She and Marcus had gotten engaged, and they wanted to celebrate with the Pinewood Valley community before moving forward with their wedding plans. We held the celebration at the community center, and it felt like welcoming home a prodigal daughter. "You all changed my life," Brenda said when called upon to speak. "I came here broken and angry and took it out on everyone around me. You had every right to reject me, to drive me away. But you didn't. You held me accountable while also giving me a chance to do better. I'll never forget that." Marcus stood beside her, his arm around her waist. He'd heard the stories, he told me later, about what Brenda had been like before they met. He was grateful to see the person she'd become. "People can change," he said. "Not everyone does, but people can. Your community proved that." As September arrived and fall colors began to emerge again, I realized I'd been in Pinewood Valley for 2 full years. 2 years of seasons and storms, conflicts and resolutions, isolation and community. 2 years of burning wood in my fireplace without interference, but also 2 years of learning that being part of something larger than myself was worth the occasional hassle. The HOA held its September meeting, and Tom announced he'd be stepping down as president. His wife had health issues that needed attention, and he couldn't devote the time the position required. "I'd like to nominate Derek Irving," he said, looking at me. I was surprised. "I don't know if I'm the right person. You stood up to abuse of power. You showed kindness when you didn't have to. You've been involved in every community initiative we've done. You're exactly the right person." Others echoed the sentiment. I looked around the room at faces that had become familiar, people I'd come to care about, and I realized I wanted to do this. Not for power or control, but to help maintain and improve what we'd built together. "Okay," I said. "I'll do it." The vote was unanimous. My first act as HOA president was to establish term limits. No one should serve more than 2 consecutive 2-year terms. Power needed to circulate, needed to be shared, needed to be understood as a responsibility rather than a privilege. My second act was to create a community scholarship fund. We'd collect voluntary donations and award them annually to a neighborhood kid pursuing education or vocational training. It wasn't HOA dues money. which would have been inappropriate, but rather a separate fund that people could contribute to if they wanted. Both proposals passed easily. As October turned the aspens gold again, and I started burning wood daily once more, I reflected on how strange life could be. I'd come to Montana to escape people and their problems. Instead, I'd been pulled into the messiest of human dramas and come out the other side with something valuable, a real community and a role in maintaining it. My chimney smoke curled into crisp autumn air, carrying warmth from my hearth into the cold sky. No one complained. No one threatened fines or liens or legal action, because we'd learned, all of us, what actually mattered: taking care of each other, holding each other accountable, forgiving mistakes while refusing to tolerate abuse, building something together that was stronger than any of us alone. Karen had complained about my chimney smoke, then begged for heat when her power died. And in that moment of vulnerability and need, we'd both learned that the rules and restrictions and petty conflicts weren't what mattered. What mattered was having someone who would open their door when the world turned cold, who would share their warmth even when they had every reason not to. Everything else was just details. I added another log to the fire and settled into my chair with a book. Outside, snow began to fall again, the first snow of the new season. Inside, I was warm and content, part of a community that had been forged through conflict and tempered by compassion. It was enough. It was everything. And every day, as smoke rose from my chimney into the Montana sky, I was reminded of the journey that had brought us all here, to this place of understanding and mutual care. The HOA that had once been a source of harassment had become a genuine force for good in people's lives. And the woman who tried to fine me into compliance had become someone I genuinely respected, someone who'd faced her own darkness and chosen to walk toward the light. People could change. Communities could heal. Conflicts could transform into connections. I'd learned all of that from a simple dispute about chimney smoke and a winter storm that forced us to see each other as humans rather than adversaries. As I turned the page in my book and listened to wood crackle in my fireplace, I felt grateful for all of it. The conflict, the resolution, the community that had emerged. Every fire I burned was a reminder of what we'd built together, one log at a time, one kind act at a time, one choice to be better at a time. And that was the real story, beneath all the details and drama. Not Karen complaining about my chimney smoke or begging for heat when her power died. But all of us learning to be better neighbors, better people, better versions of ourselves. The smoke from my chimney continued to rise, a signal to anyone watching that someone was home, someone was warm, someone was safe. And if anyone needed that warmth, that safety, that home, my door was open. That was what community meant. That was what it had always meant. And finally, after conflict and crisis and reconciliation, we'd all figured it out together.